If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Just ask the question. Because if the person doesn't immediately say yes, if they hesitate or they say no, the problem isn't here, the problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God.
Coram Deo. Literally what it means is before the face of God. And what Luther was saying simply was this, that the Christian life means to live all of your life in the presence of God.
There is nothing that you can do to automatically make yourself acceptable to the kingdom of God. You can go to church. You can live a decent life. You can be a good, moral, virtuous person, but that does not make you a Christian.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I am your host, Rihanna, for another program of Livin For Christ here on Diggin' Deeper. The Livin For Christ series has been a real joy for me. And while there have only been a handful of programs produced, I believe that we are on the way to something special. As Christians, we do our best to live for Christ. But living for Christ in a secular world is not always easy, so on this program, I want to offer hope and optimism for doing this. No, this is not a prosperity gospel message, as the Christian life is full of hardship along with prosperous moments, but we want to remind you that God is there at all times regardless of the circumstances. Today's program, I want to discuss your faith and how our faith needs to be the core at how we live our life regardless of what may comes up against us. We will look at morality and how Christians are to see morality, including a little discussion on how some in the secular world may view it as use the Bible as our guide. Again, I understand that the road we live on is not always straight and paved, and this is why faith and prayer are so important. I want to remind you to keep going. On this program, I do not get too deep into different doctrines. We have other programs on Digging Deeper that do this, but I do use the Bible to further the understanding of each topic on each program. First, what is the purpose of morality? Let us look at Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. From this verse, we learn that Christians are called to be subject to governing authorities, emphasizing that these authorities are established by God. It's a call for Christians to live as law-abiding citizens, recognizing that government, even with its imperfections, plays a role in God's overall plan. God does not want us to live by the motto or have the mindset, my life, my rules. While we are not to live by blind faith or subjected to just any rule or law, we are called to be good citizens of the city, state, nation we belong to. But at the core is the fact we are subjected to higher powers, and the utmost highest is God. Breaking down this verse, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities is the core command instructing Christians to willingly submit to the laws and leadership of the government in their society. For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist have been instituted by God. Explains the why behind the command. Paul asserts that all authority ultimately comes from God, even if it is not always exercised in a way that Christians approve of. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. Highlights the serious nature of resisting God's appointed authority. It's not just about breaking the law. It's about defying God's will. One reason we need morality is it provides a framework for resolving disputes and upholding justice, ensuring that society functions smoothly and that individuals feel safe and secure. This morality is given for the principles which emphasize actions that benefit individuals and society as a whole, contributing to a more just and equitable world. Continuing with Romans chapter 13, verses 2 through 7. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to connection due to narrow. See for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Here, the verses emphasize that Christians should submit to governing authorities because those authorities are established by God to maintain order and justice. It highlights that these authorities are not a source of fear for those who do good, but for those who do evil, and that Christians should fulfill their civic duties like paying taxes. Further, the Bible places love at the heart of morality, with love for God and love for neighbor being the two greatest commandments. And this morality is seen within God's character. Jesus Christ is our example, and his commands are the ultimate source of morality. The Bible outlines both blessings for following God's will and consequences for disobedience. So, how do troubled people, you and I, live a life with morality? The simple answer is, live for Jesus Christ. However, the simple and easy answer is not always enough. For example, 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 21, For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that ye should follow his steps. Here it is detailed that Christ suffered for believers, leaving behind an example for them to emulate by following in his footsteps, even when facing unjust treatment or persecution. Christians have a specific purpose or calling in their lives, which is to live in a way that reflects Christ's example, which is presented as the model for believers. He endured pain and hardship, not for his own wrongdoing, but for the sake of humanity. The idea that Christ's life, particularly his suffering, is meant to be a pattern for Christians to imitate. It's not just a historical event, but a guide for how to live and respond to adversity. Believers are to endure suffering patiently and trust in God's righteous judgment, just as Christ did when facing persecution. It connects Christ's suffering with the idea of atonement, where he bore the sins of humanity on the cross. Some theists argue that God is the ultimate source of moral authority, and that without God, there is no objective basis for morality. But on the other hand, others argue that morality is not divinely ordained, but rather a product of human evolution and social interactions. Moral normativity. This argument posits that the very existence of moral rules and obligations points to a divine lawgiver. In other words, if there are objective moral truths, there must be a source for those truths. Since theists believe God is the source of all truth, he must also be the source of morality. But what about those who believe we are products by accident or some sort of evolutionary process? Evolutionary ethics argues that morality is rooted in our biological and social evolution, suggesting that natural selection has favored cooperative, sound, and altruistic behaviors necessary for group survival. This perspective proposes that moral sentiments and intuitions are not divinely bestowed, or solely products of rational thought, but rather evolved adaptations that enhance fitness by promoting cooperation and social cohesion. For what we do on this program, I will not go deep into doctrinal issues because Livin For Christ is a program where we encourage and motivate you, the believer, to do just that. Live for Jesus Christ. For the non-believer, we want to teach you a simple way to live for Jesus Christ because we are all searching for answers. An explanation from the evolutionary process explains that emotions like empathy, shame, guilt, and gratitude, which play a significant role in moral decision-making, have evolutionary roots. These sentiments can be seen as mechanisms that promote cooperation and discourage harmful behavior. Some studies suggest that certain moral principles, such as those related to fairness, reciprocity, and avoiding harm, are remarkably consistent across cultures. This universality could be explained by the fact that these principles are rooted in evolved human psychology and social dynamics. When looking at such explanations, Christians will agree there are certain truths in these statements. For example, our moral principles across different and multiple cultures and doctors and uptight more about the factories and certain rules and laws are universally accepted as truth. However, the main disagreement is where and how we end up in agreement. For Christians, truth is rooted in God. But for non-believers, particularly those who adhere to evolutionary thought, truth is rooted in some type of evolutionary process. The concept of evolution should not be confused with the evolutionary process proposed by Darwin and others. When I look at my life, I see how I have evolved over time. But those who subscribe to Darwin's theory of evolution look at evolving as a process that takes in fiction, place over time, which we are in agreement with. But the two processes shift, again, in how the process takes place. Christians believe humanity is a creation of God, with God being Crockett, the creator, while non-believers see creation as evolving from something else. What that something else is, they are unclear of. One explanation is genetic mutation, which takes out God. A genetic mutation is a change in the usual DNA sequence of a gene. These changes can be small or large and can occur naturally or be caused by external factors. While some mutations have little to no effect, others can cause disease or increase the risk of certain conditions. While none of us have all the answers, Christian or unbeliever, the biggest missing link with the evolutionary project, the very back, and or natural selection theories, is in how human life began and where. For me, I do not have to have all the answers, but having some type of understanding of why, where, and how is crucial. Now that we have discussed a few worldviews, let us get back to morality. Matthew chapter 6 verse 24 reads, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other." You cannot serve God and mammon. This is why it is important to have sound reasoning and an understanding of why you believe what you believe. As a Christian, I believe in evolution, or a process of change, and my life is an example of that. But I do not subscribe to a process of evolution that changes over time that does not involve God. God is the main reason for the changes in my life. Most importantly, God is the reason why I am here on earth and why my life has meaning. Acts chapter 5 verse 29, "Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, 'We ought to obey God rather than men.'" This verse highlights a fundamental principle in Christian ethics. God's commands supersede human laws when the two are in conflict. It emphasizes that Christians should obey God's will, even when it means disobeying human authorities. The context of this verse is the apostles' trial before the Sanhedrin. The people context of this verse is the apostles' trial before the Sanhedrin, where they were accused of disobedience for continuing to preach about Jesus. Despite being flogged for their actions, they reaffirmed their commitment to sharing the gospel. This verse is a testament to their unwavering faith and willingness to suffer for their beliefs. We can use this verse to circle back to the idea that Jesus Christ is our example, particularly for morality. Why are these previous verses important in regards to morality? Simple. As for Christians, God is our example in all things. And because he is our example, especially in morality, we have to make him our core. And this includes his word, so when there's a conflict between obeying human authority and obeying God's commands, Christians should prioritize obedience to God. We cannot serve two masters. Here is the last piece of scripture for today from Matthew chapter 22 verses 37 through 40. Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Here, we have the two greatest commandments, loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself. These two commandments, according to Jesus, encompass all of the law and the prophets. Let us end our program here. This has been a shorter program, but the importance is big. We are not justified because of what we do, or could do, but through our faith in Jesus Christ. It's only through Jesus Christ that we are saved. I do hope you enjoyed this program for Livin' for Christ here on Diggin' Deeper. I am your host, Rihanna, and if you did like this program, think about liking and subscribing to our channel and share with all you know. Until next time, stay safe and God bless.